To this seminar on food sovereignty, which is jointly organised by Social Resistance and the Green Left. In fact, we've been working closely with the Green Left for a long time. I think this is the third or the fourth such seminar that we've jointly organised over the last few years, so we're very pleased to do that. From our point of view in social resistance, I think since we started to organise this meeting or the tour with Maria going around the country about 6 months ago, the whole issue of food sovereignty has been something of a steep learning curve for us. I think originally we tended to see food sovereignty coming at it from the point of view of climate change, but what we've been confronted with as we've done this work is that in fact it's a gigantic issue which is involved not just in climate change but in the operation of the capitalist system, of the economic crisis, of peak oil, of the operation of the markets. It's an absolutely huge issue, and of course it affects everybody on the planet to a huge degree. So we've been increasingly pleased that we've organised this. I was trying to think of a way of summarising what is meant by food sovereignty. Then I realised that this fantastic photograph that we've got on the front of the leaflet with the banner in front of the demonstration actually summarises incredibly well. It says food sovereignty is for the farmers to have control over the seeds, the land, the technology, the knowledge and everything necessary for food production, which I think is a pretty good summary. And so it's a very key subject, and I think we can have a very interesting discussion here in the course of the day. We've got an excellent panel of speakers. The first speaker on will be Reshad Desai, who's on the right, who is a South African climate change activist who's here doing a tour over next week in preparation for the climate change events at the beginning of December. And we've got Graciela Romero who is the Programme Director for War on Want. And what we've also realised in the course of organising this is that War on Want have an absolutely excellent track record on this, and lots of excellent material which we would encourage people to have a look at. And in fact, I think that Graciela has actually written the key report on food sovereignty for War on Want. And we've got Pierre Rosset, who is come here this morning from Paris, who is a member of the MPA, has written extensively on Asia over a long period of time, and in fact has very close relationship over a long period of time with Maria and her comrades in the Philippines. And then of course we have Maria. I'm particularly pleased to be able to introduce Maria because I've known Maria for quite a long time through the international connections of socialist resistance. But Maria sort of has more than one role. On the one hand, she's an activist in an NGO, COSAR, which campaigns on agricultural rights, land rights, and so on, and which has a very good record and all that. But also, she's a political activist that has been involved in a struggle against various repressive regimes in the Philippines over a very long period of time, which has resulted in a situation where the comrades have actually a zone which they control, and which has meant that they've been able to seek to practically apply food sovereignty and ecological policies in the course of that. It's not something which is very much known on the left, but it is absolutely fascinating, and so it's excellent that we have Maria here. Reshad is going to speak first because he's involved in another meeting in the building or in the area on the climate change campaign, and he's going to juggle between this meeting and that meeting in the course of the day. So Reshad is going to speak first. So Reshad for about 15 minutes.
I'm going to explain a little bit about myself before I get into the thick of things. I want to do that because many of you, I know in England, UK, you're very attuned to accents, and you will hear that my accent is similar to your own, if not identical to many of your own. So I stand today before you to report on the climate justice struggles in South Africa and the wider continent. Because many of you, with others around the world, led a movement, an international movement against white supremacy in South Africa, which was instrumental in bringing that country to its knees. And I was in exile because, again, of the political culture in this country, the strength of the democracy. My family was given political refugee status, and I was naturalized in this country. I returned to South Africa in 1990 from Zimbabwe, where I'd spent a few years prior to that. So I've been home for just over 20 years now. And I think really what is required is something akin we need to what we did 25 years ago with the anti-apartheid movement. It's certainly something on that scale that's required, because we know that COP17 in Durban, the heart is going to be ripped out of the Kyoto Protocol, which said that in 2012 a legally binding commitment period should come into effect, which the polluters are now people who have historic responsibility for what mess we have in the world today in terms of carbon emissions and global warming, are now trying to pull away from. They're not willing to go into that legally binding commitment. Instead, they want to continue with a pledge and review process where they voluntarily give commitments, a process we all know that has only led to an increase in the level of carbon emissions from the 1990 levels. So I've come to, left my work and come to talk to you guys for 6, 7, 8 days in the UK, because I know without that international movement, without that push from below, we're going to be unable to pull our governments away from the stranglehold of what we call in South Africa the mineral energy complex. In South Africa, we are both a victim and a perpetrator in terms of climate change. We have one of the biggest carbon per capita outputs in the world. Internationally, we're the world's 12th ranking in terms of world polluters. I'm going to come back to that because it's quite a unique position to be in, and it provides opportunities for us, certainly in South Africa. But we also know that that movement will never be what it needs to be until the big battalions of the working class join the battles, join this movement, integrate climate change demands into the demands of the generalised movement. And that means Germany, UK, France, all the big polluters have to see movements which are fighting both on a national level and on an international level. So that's my intro down. My own history, how do we build this movement? It's the biggest challenge. You've got cuts, you've got austerity measures, job insecurity, pensions. This is something low down on the list. Warming, global warming in the UK, I remember, I said, great. You know what, I've never been further north than Sheffield or Manchester. If I had a chance, I'd always go south. We come from warmer climes. That's where we evolved, and it's natural for us to want warmth. When you're from the northern hemisphere, it doesn't mean much. Great, you know, we swallow the denialist. The eternal summer, what's the problem? We need warmth. We like warmth. Siberia, what's the problem? It can be the Garden of Eden. It can become the new breadbasket of Europe. But we know otherwise now. But I got involved because the movement back then was fighting. Arthur Scargill, 10,000 miners came down to defend Asian women in their saris outside the Kodak factory in Grunwicks. I saw people fighting against fascism, against racism, against the growth of the National Front. Hundreds of thousands of people coming out into the street. We were able to build a very big movement and defeat the Nazis back in that period. It was, and as I say, the solidarity that this country built for the South African struggle was incredible, and it was critical. What's this got to do with climate change? Everything. Because we've lost one big city already. There's no more building going on in New Orleans. There's no insurance will be provided for it. Certainly none of the buildings got destroyed. That was the big first casualty of climate change in the First World. What made me angry was the state's response, the authoritarian response, the way prisoners were left inside their cells, the way guns were pointed at people who were stranded, the way people were left to die. Then, comrades, I've got to put my hands up. I've been making films for the last 15 years of my life, trying to keep government's power accountable through filmmaking. Political meetings, I stopped going to political meetings. And then came the Arab Spring. And it's a new period. People are excited. Young people are excited. And I'm glad to see we've got a few people in the room who are young. But we've got to have a lot more. Because we, the over 40s, don't have the energy to be doing 5 meetings a day, 6 campaigns a week, working 100% at this. And basically we have to work at 100% because, you know what, the pensions, the national health and the rest of it will become meaningless in 30 years time, 40 years time, if we don't integrate centrally into our campaigns a very clearly international and equitable position on the world's resources, on contraction of those carbon emissions and a convergence, so we all equally share how much we're able to put into the air. Without that, a deal, an international movement is impossible. Until we can talk openly and clearly and vocally from the developed world about how much how much carbon emissions you can put into the air. You think we're going to build a movement in China, build a movement in India. China's number 1, the biggest polluter in the world. India number 3, South Africa number 12, Brazil number 4. This is the path of development, energy development, that these developing and emerging economies are taking. And essentially, nothing's going to shift until we can move and agree internationally on what that's going to be. So, looking closer at the Arab Spring, what have been the motivating forces behind that? Of course, populations have had dictators squeezing their neck further and further, taking what space, democratic space that has been in that country away gradually over the last 3 decades, and people getting tired. But it's just not political. It's economic driving forces. The fires in Russia, in Greece, the floods in China and Pakistan, these have pushed up basic commodity food prices up incredibly, by 40%. And you know what? When you're on a few dollars a day, 10, 15, $20 a day, the price of bread means an awful lot. It means an awful lot, comrades. We're seeing grain prices going to increase in our continent over the next few years, decade, by 180%. The amount of land in Kenya that now people are living on, that's degraded. It's 31% of all the land mass. There's massive migrations happening out of West Africa, as we've seen 40 years of droughts. The lakes in Chad, in Turkana, are drying up. The rivers are being diverted for land grabs, for big corporations who produce flowers and other great things from our continent. So you can have a nice set of flowers at a reasonable price on your desk. In my own country, and this I want to wind up now, the titanic struggle to end apartheid meant that we were able to deal with some of the historic inequities in our own country. That gave us basically, we had to fight for a basic income grant, which 15 million people are on. The majority of those people are from the rural areas who grow their own staple crop, maize, corn. That's the basis of their diet. Those yields are no longer big enough to actually provide food for their families. That basic income grant that was supposed to allow them some access, entry into the cash economy, is now being used to supplement their food incomes because their own yields are no longer big enough. Our electricity prices increased 25% last year and will increase another 100% over the next 3 years. So we can pay for subsidised electricity for the big companies that are using up our resources. The struggle over electricity, and there are some huge fights over electricity, and the struggle for climate change is indivisible. Because that electricity is expensive because it's from coal. It's inefficient electricity. It's expensive because we are having to pay for the new coal-fired power stations with that price. There are no longer any options for us but to mobilise on a huge scale around climate and integrate them into every single campaign of ours in the townships. Because people, and it's easier for us to integrate that into our everyday bread and butter issues. It's easier because people see the link between governments who are in bed with companies and corporations which exploit them around electricity, which exploit them around their right to water, which deny them the right to land, which lead to huge deportations out of the country of other Africans, which are leading to Africans fighting one another on the streets of our major cities. It's a small, it's small beginnings, but from it, you know, the few hundred activists were involved in an organisation which is called the Democratic Left Front, which is essentially an affiliated anti-capitalist civic-based organisations and individuals and a few political parties, but it's the base of that movement is the civic-based organisations are coming together, and we will have a block of around 3,000 people at the COP17 for about 7 days, and every day we'll be having mass meetings and mass demonstrations. And we hope at those mass meetings to see some of you comrades down in Durban, to give us your wisdom, to tell us what your challenges are, to take your long tradition of fighting around the climate and fighting your own government around the climate jobs and unemployment as we're fighting, to share those experiences, to begin to forge the beginnings of an international movement which can shift this. Because if we don't shift this, as I say, everything else becomes redundant. Thank you.